Okay, we're on air. It is Thursday, April 19th. This meeting is a check-in for active development tasks for Backdrop CMS. Before we get into things we're working on, I want to say thanks to people who are continuing to port and maintain modules for Backdrop. We've got 2 new projects this week, the PDF to image project and the block embed project, both of which are modules. We also have a new maintainer application in the Backdrop Contrib group. So if anyone else is interested in joining Backdrop Contrib, you just create an issue in the issue queue and we'll walk you through the rest from there. So hopefully people are finding that process fairly uncomplicated and helpful. Website development tasks. For backdropcms.org, we are working on improving the modules, themes, and layouts selection process. There's a meta issue that includes design changes at issue number 442 in the backdropcms.org queue. That hasn't gotten any attention in the last few weeks. If anyone has front-end and site building abilities, there are tasks there that we could use your help on. Also, if anyone has any interest in working on the way that search works on backdropcms.org. I think right now it's using a views exposed filter to search specific fields. We might want to change that to use Backdrop's default search and fix any problems with Backdrop's default search so that other people who are using Backdrop for similar things would get better results as well. Forums. Okay, we have a lot of updates on Backdrop CMS, the project itself, and a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today is coming as a direct result of a video earlier this week. Did a CMS smorgasbord where they compared Backdrop CMS, Drupal 8, Joomla, and WordPress, and they did a quick install of each one and a very simple test of creating or editing a piece of content and changing the theme just to get an overall first impression of the software. That video, if you would like to watch it, is linked on the Backdrop website under the Backdrop Mentions section, which is in the news part of the site. If you want to watch the video, I always feel like I learn a lot from watching other people use software for the first time, from all versions of software, whether it's Drupal or Backdrop or WordPress or Joomla or whatever. So that was kind of a fun experiment, watching somebody who's obviously very technically skilled. He's using the command line to like copy files around and stuff. Experience each of these pieces of software for the first time. So with that, I'll kick it over to Nate, and Nate, you can point out any of the issues that we're talking about for Backdrop that are directly related to that video.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been a busy week in the world of Backdrop product. First of all, 1.9.4 came out yesterday. There was a CK editor security update that was released that then set in motion Drupal releasing a new security release that then set in motion us releasing a new security release. So 1.9.4 is now out, including a number of small fixes as well. So our current backlog of minor fixes is now cleared out and pushed out in 1.9.4. That includes a couple of other nice little fixes, some things related to upgrades, like the upgrade from Drupal 7 had some problems migrating its emails, that new lines were being lost in like welcomes and password resets, all of the emails sent by Backdrop. That has now been fixed through the upgrade path. And also new installs of Backdrop if you were on a host that supported the new emoji compatible database. What's the right word for that? Encoding UTF-MB4. That now when you do a new install, that flag is properly set so that right after installing, it doesn't say, hey, you need to upgrade your database, because your database is actually already upgraded. It's just that we were forgetting to set the flag saying that it had already been updated. So that's nice that a couple of those items have been cleared out. That second issue actually was encountered by that CMS smorgasbord smackdown. And so had he waited until today, that wouldn't have been a problem. But that's the way things go with live broadcasts. That sometimes people run into things that you wish they wouldn't have. 1.9.5 will be our next bug fix release. We still have this outstanding issue that's plagued us all of the 1.9 release, and that's issue 2904. That is database credentials are now URL encoded in settings.php, and that caused some problems with people upgrading that if you have a % symbol in your database credentials, now that % symbol doesn't work anymore. It has to be encoded as well to make it so that it doesn't get read as a special character. So we have some attempts to fix that in 2904. The fix is actually pretty good in there, but we would like to have some kind of notification to users saying, hey, you need to update your settings.php to make it so that that % symbol gets encoded properly. There's also a number of issues for 1.9.5. You can find those in GitHub under the 1.9.5 milestone. For 1.10, 1.10 comes out May 15th. And our feature freeze is May 1st. That means that we've got 11 days, 11 or 12 days to complete the functionality for what will be in 1.10. And then from then on out, it's tidying things up, cleaning up bugs, and then the 1.10 release will be May 15th. So areas of focus for 1.10 include some improvements to modules, themes, and layouts, the way those things are installed and found and enabled, and just general interactions with extending Backdrop. The first issue of that is instant filter on the modules page should include module grouping names. That's issue 2973. Current status of that is that we got a new pull request this week. Thank you, Jen, but it needs some work. So that is back to the needs work status. Issue number 37, goodness gracious, an old issue, is making it so that modules can have tags in addition to categories. And then initially that's in the product, and then later those tags would also be used when doing module searches on backdropcms.org and when using the project browser in Backdrop that ultimately searches on backdropcms.org. Status of that is that I think that there's been some effort and work put into it, but it's currently being revised, I think. Jen, is there? Oh, it's actually in a needs review state. Any recent updates on that? Sorry, I didn't check on that before the meeting.
No, it still needs some attention.
Okay. It is needs review status, though. So perhaps I'll get around to reviewing that as I go through the needs review queue. This came up during...
It's not ready for review yet.
Oh. Not ready for review. This next item came up during the Smorgasbord cook-off, and that is that Backdrop doesn't include screenshots when you're installing a module, and more importantly, when you're installing a theme through the project browser. Like when we search for themes on backdropcms.org, of course, it would be helpful to know what those themes look like. There's a, in the agenda here, it says that this needs, there's a PR. Oh, no, it says it needs PR. Is there already an issue for this? I actually was looking yesterday and I couldn't actually find one.
Yeah, I couldn't find one either. And I think the reason we didn't have an issue for a single missing screenshot is because we had the issue for let's allow more than one screenshot. And we were going to do that both at once. But I think that might be too big a jump, especially between now and code freeze. But I think we can definitely get a single screenshot in. So I don't know. I want to take a look at it and see how far we are from anything at all. I think that the reason this single screenshot seems more approachable to me is because we already have single screenshots in those projects and we just need to display them. So it wouldn't require like any changes to the way our info files work. But getting multiple screenshots means we need to come up with some guidelines around how that would work. So I wanted to create another issue, which is why there's no number in here yet. I was also searching for one that existed already, to just link up the screenshot we have. And that might be a good first step for 110. And then for 111, we can get the whole slideshow thing going.
Yeah, so the issue for multiple screenshots is issue 1517, which has been open for quite a while, but there's no recent issue on progress on that. This is more just kind of related to the modules, themes, and layouts improvements that we've been working on. Although, I don't know, getting any of that in for 1.10 seems like it's going to be rushed and difficult. I mean, 10 days it's a short timeline to be working on something from scratch. Anyway, so that's it for the modules, themes, and layouts improvements. Some of those earlier items, they've been coming along and pretty feasible. The later items, maybe less feasible. There's a number of, let's see, oh, these things got moved around in the agenda. Okay, so I'm going to do the translation improvements because we always cover those every week, even though there hasn't been any recent progress on those. Making menu items translatable, issue 225. Is currently in needs work status, but is not far off from completion. Block translation is also in really good shape, issue 2956. And in this past week, we've had a code review on that, and it's back to needing a little bit of further work. In particular, we could use some assistance in writing tests there. That is the larger holdup. The code review only has some minor items that need to be addressed, but before they can be merged in, we need test coverage for making it so that these blocks are translatable. Issue 704 is config translation. This one, we haven't seen any real progress on this cycle, and I think that it almost certainly is getting bumped at this point. So that is still just, we have a rough outline of how to proceed there, and a proof of concept pull request, but no real solid code there that would be likely to get merged in for 1.10. So that one will probably be bumped into the next release being 1.11. Well, as we close in towards the end of a release cycle, there's lots of activity, just people trying to complete features and functionality that they would like to see in the next minor release. And this release cycle has been no exception to that. And so there's a number of really kind of exciting things that have been worked on that are nearing completion. Issue 3001, HerbDuel has been adding functionality for automatic comment closing so that per content type, you can set up comments so that after a certain period of time, the comment thread capability is automatically closed. That's a generally good capability to cut down on unwanted spam and old content, for example. It's also one of the features that is listed in the make it so that Backdrop has feature parity with WordPress, as that's a core WordPress functionality as well. So that is in really great shape. It was code reviewed just earlier this week. It does have tests written. The new test coverage is fantastic. Thank you for doing that. And HerbDuel is planning on doing a re-roll here shortly. That will probably be the last final step there. Before that is RTBC. Also in the category of useful editorial enhancements, issue 2072, Graham72 has been working through this issue for a while, making it so that you can upload files through CK Editor in a similar fashion to the way you can upload images through CK Editor. That is currently in a state of needs review. Thanks, Olaf, for doing review rounds on that as well, and there's been a lot of great back and forth there. If you're interested in checking out some new editorial capabilities, that's a great one to take a stab at and give some review feedback on. Also, first impression improvements, or things that we could do to improve the installer. There's a slew of items here that are also in a lot of needs review states. Issue 3032. This is a new issue that actually just opened this week after discovering some new fancy JavaScript. Browsers can now have direct access to time zone information, and this is widely available in every major browser now. This functionality hasn't existed in the past, and it makes it so that our time zone selection, right now, we only kind of guess at people's time zones. We can calculate the GMT offset and then guess basically on the most popular time zone that is on that offset, and then roughly estimate where a person actually is. And then we set the time zone to be that popular time zone by default. But that's why we show the time zone during the installer, is because we frequently get that wrong, because we can only do, or previously we can only do GMT offset. Now that browsers have access to time zone information, we can accurately identify which time zone a person is in when they're doing the installer. And if we have a very high percentage hit rate of getting the right time zone, there's no real need to show them the option for time zone at all. We should just pre-populate it with our best guess. And then if we get it wrong, then they can just change the time zone in their site settings, and we lower friction during the install process. So that's issue 3032. That could use some testing because it is both in the installer and JavaScript based, both of which means that there's no simple test coverage for it. And even if there were, it'd be difficult to test. So trying that out, especially if you're in different locations around the world, or in less popular time zones, or places that have really screwed up time zones like Arizona, then those would all be useful use cases to test out there.
I think it's great that we can detect the time zones, but I wouldn't necessarily remove it from the installation process.
Yep. Olaf and I also added the same comment there, because the person who will be running the installer from their browser does not necessarily reside in the same place where the site is intended to be running on, nor
like I'm building a site right now for someone in Mountain Time, so it's like.
But even then, like a configuration like that, I mean, you obviously need to do a lot of configuration beyond that when you're doing the installation, or when you're building any kind of site. Yeah.
That's something that's easily overlooked if it's not set like right off the bat, which is why it's there in the first place.
It is true. I don't know. Just my desire to lower the friction of the installer is really great.
We could do something like hide the select drop down and just put like installing in time zone, have a link to change it or something. I don't know.
Interesting. Well, let's add some comments to that issue then. In any case, the JavaScript enhancement can still be put in place to make it so that we guess the right time zone more frequently. Maybe that gets put in place, but perhaps not the hiding of it. I don't know. I'd like to see it hidden entirely, but I can probably be talked out of that.
Yeah. I think the friction is not so big. It's because it just gets displayed, and you don't have to change it. You just notice it. Okay, it's everything okay, and then you go on.
Jen, wasn't you mentioned in the smorgasbord that the time zone was a problem for
it was only a problem in Drupal 8. It was not a problem in Backdrop, and it was a problem because they changed the select list from what we have now to something that was like it had like opt groups in it or whatever, And so it was super hard to navigate. He couldn't find the right time zone for him. He tried to type in it and didn't. It would like he set the country and then it defaulted to the wrong, like the time zones didn't match the country. He had a really hard time with the way that it was set up in Drupal 8. I think we've already made a lot of improvements over that because we removed country. So there's no expectation that the time zone will match the country after you set the country. And we didn't change our time zone select widget to be one that's much harder for people to use. It's still just a select list, has a million options in it. But if we can leave that the way it is and then set it to the correct one, no one will open it, move on. So I think,
that the situation that Mike's talking about, that he does need to change it because, you know, it doesn't actually match the area he's in, would still have that same problem. And
yeah. So I think Kalana said it a comment to the like, it was like, let's change it to the same thing that Drupal 8 uses. We should not do that until we can get select 2, which is the thing that allows you to do the area you're looking for. That's what the CMS Smorgasbord guy, his name I think is Marcel, that's what he tried to do and failed because it didn't work. And so I think if we can get that JavaScript like search autocomplete working, then we can change the widget. But the widget that Drupal 8 has installed was much harder to use than the one that we have now. And I think the expectation of the country and the time zone being correlated was also an issue. But I think that adding the JavaScript is a no-brainer to make it more correct for the person who's likely to be using it. But maybe we shouldn't hide it yet until we get some kind of consensus on whether the majority of people installing Backdrop sites are installing in their own time zone or not. And we shouldn't change it yet until we can get a better user experience of using the new widget.
Okay, well, let's take this one to the issue queue. The issue is 3032, and we can discuss further there, or at least descope the more ambitious parts of it, perhaps, and then follow up in subsequent issues if needed. More things in the installer, or kind of related to the installer. Password field updates. This is issue 297. That in order to make it so that the installer and actually anywhere that you see a password is more mobile or touch friendly, adding a password toggle so that you can show hide the password, and also removing the password confirmation field. So instead of having type your password again, which can be very tedious on a mobile device or any touch device actually, making so that there's only one password field, and then allowing the user to show it or show hide their password so that they can review it visually rather than typing it in twice. That issue does a whole bunch of actually really pretty neat things. That it moves password strength off of the password confirm password element and onto the normal password element, and then also adds the password toggle to the normal password element. And then updates the places where password confirm is currently used to switch to the toggle approach. So that one's been in discussion for quite a while. I think that we've generally agreed that's a good approach to be following. But even again, if like the approach doesn't apply everywhere that we're currently attempting to do it, we can still make the API enhancements and then decide where those changes are actually put into use at a later time. So more comments and feedback would be appreciated on that one, issue 297. Whew, okay, more in the installer. Issue 2520. This issue came up a couple of months ago that we had someone that was installing Backdrop for the first time and found that they could not get Backdrop installed because of a very cryptic error saying no such file or directory. Coincidentally, I've actually been encountering this same problem for months, but I hadn't really looked into why that was actually occurring. This person found that they could switch their database credentials from using localhost to being 127.0.0.1, and that worked better for them. And the full explanation of why that is in that issue. But the recommendation that we have in there is that we should just try both. We should try localhost. If localhost works, then use it. And if localhost doesn't work, then try 127.0.0.1 as an automatic toggle during the installation process. So basically, try both. If either one of those synonyms for localhost is being used as the database, then we should try one approach, and then we should try the other if the first one fails, and thus reduce friction further. It's a sort of thing that if one works and the other one doesn't, there's not anything wrong really with your installation. It's just two approaches to reach the same goal with kind of a minor difference in implementation. So more feedback could be useful on that issue as well. And lastly, issue 496, also related to the installer, is the suggestion that if the database doesn't exist for where you're trying to install Backdrop into, that we simply create the database at the time of running install.php. And that functionality, I don't think that made it into Drupal 7, but it is in Drupal 8. But we had originally, I think, backed away from that a little bit because of security concerns. But on further review, we found that the ability to create tables is the same permission level as the ability to create an entire database. Similarly, the ability to drop tables is the same permission as the ability to drop an entire database. Since Backdrop already needs the permission to create and drop tables for a number of things, installing and uninstalling modules or adding or removing fields, for example, there's no difference in permission level between those two operations. So creating a database during the installation is no different than permission-wise than creating a table. So there's very little difference, at least in permissioning, as far as MySQL is concerned.
Is there a cryptic error right now if the database isn't created? Or is there a good error?
I think it's in that issue possibly, or maybe it's in issue 2520, the other one. It's a big long error. It's like a bullet list, 4 bullet points of like possible things that could be wrong. Okay. Actually, looks like there is no screenshot. Oh yeah, there is. Yeah. Is the database server running? Does the database exist, or does the user have sufficient privileges to create the database? Have you entered the correct database name? Have you entered the correct username and password? Have you entered the correct host name? Yeah.
We might want to shorten those last 3. Do you have the right information for the database host and user?
Yep.
Something. Anyway.
That actually is part of that pull requests. Because we don't need to tell the user, does the database exist, because it would be automatically created.
Yeah.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is there might still be permissions where the user doesn't, if the user doesn't have permission to, because in MySQL, you can grant permissions to users on particular databases, not the ability to create a new database. Like if you create a new user and grant all on, then just like table name star, that user only has permission to do everything within that database, not create new databases. Right. So there is still the possibility where they have to create the database that's not created yet. So we shouldn't remove that error, because even if we can't create the database, that doesn't mean that they don't have to. So they might still have to create the database themselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually what I was saying, Mike, is that literally the ability to create a table within a database is the same as the permission to create the entire database.
But are you sure? Because you're granting people within a database.
I know, it's bizarre. You can actually grant people permission on a database that doesn't even yet exist.
Yeah, but if they, so they could create that database then, but not arbitrary ones?
Yep, that's right. And they could even drop that database, but not drop arbitrary databases.
Wow, so then I have no idea why Drush doesn't actually drop the database when it's recreating it. When you go Drush SQL drop, it drops all the tables but not the database. And so you end up with the DB tables filled with crap. Anyway, that's entirely another issue.
I doubt that that is universal across all database systems, but it is the case for MySQL.
Okay.
Yeah, strange. That's exactly why I was like, it seems like a security concern, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's actually exactly the same permission level, even though I would probably say maybe that shouldn't be, like as far as MySQL is concerned, but it's what it is. Okay, anyway, more feedback on that. Yeah, take a look at all of those issues if you're interested in participating or reviewing. Feedback is needed on all of them. And I think taking it individually, but certainly if they were all combined together, those are a number of issues that would reduce friction during the installation process, making it more likely that people can get through the installer with fewer problems. That's it for the 1.10 summary. There's more issues, of course, and if anybody has any items that they would like to bring up regarding things that are being attempted for 1.10, open the floor for any additional issues that are worth mentioning during the meeting. Anybody?
Yeah, I have a couple of suggestions. The first one has to do with the friction in the installer. If I have things correctly, so we ask a bunch of information from the user. Then once we have the credentials and the information for the database, the installer just runs off and it installs modules and so on and so forth. And all the user sees is just a progress bar. And this happens for a while. Then once that finishes, then we ask some more information as like the website name and so on and so forth, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we ask for that final bit of information while the installer is doing whatever it's doing at the background? It would want to be a considerable amount of time saved, but still it will be the perception of doing things faster.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It's a really great idea. I know why it doesn't do that. It's because it's more complicated. But that is a really great idea. I like while we're doing things for you, maybe you can just fill this information, and then it's just a tiny bit faster. So that's one there, food for thought. And then the other one was with this security update for CK Editor. I recalled an old request. I'm not sure if we dismissed that issue or not, to use a CDN to load the CK Editor. Maybe it was for another library too, but I think it was CK Editor. And what this got me thinking is if Backdrop, there was a request to load that from a CDN, but I think our concern was what happens if we need to ship it with call, because if people are doing that on their local without internet access, then their CK Editor will not work. And my thought was, why can't we have it so that by default it tries to load it from the CDN, and if it fails to load it from the CDN, then it gets the whatever local version it has. And the reason why my thought process was if the CDN was pointing to whatever the latest version is each time instead of a specific version, then no patching would necessarily be required, because the sites would automatically acquire.
A couple, because we want that code being a specific way. And so, like, if we need to make changes, like, for example, right now we're running a patched version of 1.7.3, and that code does not exist anywhere in a CDN. So, and if we just said point at latest and they changed something in latest that broke our entire integration, like that would be a big problem. So I think like, yes, it's valid that people might want to have access to their rich text editor when they're not online, which was what our original argument was. But I think that's less important than the fact that we kind of need to make sure that all of our moving pieces fit together. And I think that providing people an option to come from a CDN is good, but I think that you know, that maybe should be left to contrib or should be the second choice rather than being what we do in core. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, piling on to the problems with using a CDN also is that if we just use the latest version of CKEditor all the time, which is actually what we attempted to do in our patch, was just to update to the latest version of CKEditor that includes the security fix, but it turned out that it's not compatible with something and it broke the editor. So having a new release of CKEditor suddenly breaking everybody's website because they made an API change would not be ideal for a backdrop experience. And on top of that, the combination of plugins that we're using, when you assemble a CKEditor build, you choose which plugins you want. And we have a combination of plugins that is lighter weight than a typical CKEditor installation, but also includes some non-standard plugins that are not in a CKEditor installation. So our particular bundled version of CKEditor is a combination of plugins that you wouldn't find on a CDN either. So unless you CDN'd in a particular combination or CDN'd like the whole shebang version of CKEditor that included a bunch of plugins that you didn't need or the backdrop didn't use.
Maybe we should just switch to using Composer to manage all this.
I know. I imagine you're joking.
That would be NPM, Mike. NPM.
Yeah. Here's another thought. I won't insist anymore, but here's another thought. If we maintained somewhere on backdropcms.org a list of the most recent compatible version that does not break things, then instead of all sites requesting the latest version of CKEditor, they could just be requesting from backdropcms.org what is the latest compatible version. So if we have tested,
we already do that. It's bundled in.
Yeah, but if it was via CDN, so if we sort of like instructed them to load the specific version from the CDN,
why would we want to do this? What? I don't see the benefit to all this.
In this case where we had the security release, every backdrop site would not need to be updated if they use the CDN. So they would automatically acquire the latest compatible.
But they would still have to update it. What would that update process like? We can fetch the latest on installation, but if like, where's the updater that would update from the CDN just this one thing?
Well, a security release comes out, it doesn't, and everybody needs to update their site because of the CKEditor that needs to be included there. But if there wasn't any need for immediate update, so they would get the patched version from the CDN, the recommended, whatever we have as a recommended, and they could update backdrop at their own leisure, like whenever they feel like.
Yeah, so I think you're suggesting that somehow we would deliver to backdrop sites saying this is the current version that you should be using. I don't think that we would want to have like a URL be like, you know, latest compatible URL that didn't change, and we were, oops, hang on, sorry, problem there. I don't think that we would want to change out from underneath people at the same URL. Like today, this is version 4.7.2, and tomorrow it's 4.7.3 at the same URL. Although that would be the easiest solution, it's also kind of, it's possibly finicky.
Well, it's also risky because there could be something that they're using that we don't know, that we now made an API change without notifying them that there's an API change because they have no version number. This is, I have this problem all the time with like using systems that provide APIs that don't know how APIs work, where they have the same URL and they'll make a change, and then all of a sudden your data coming from that URL is different, and all of the stuff that you've built that depended on it being the first way is broken. We need to have some kind of versioning so that anyone who's written anything on top of CKEditor break if we just change the code out from underneath them on the same URL. And so then if we're pointing at 7.1.4 and we change it to 7.1.5, or we still need to have them update their local site to say, go use 7.1.5 instead.
Hey guys, maybe if we're going to have this discussion, we could have it somewhere else because we're almost at 1 o'clock.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
it's a busy
we are
week.
out of time. Anyway, I mean, we're done with issues, so we could stop the broadcast at any time. But I think the conversation's valid too.
Okay.
Like,
so there's no more issues after this. All right.
Yeah, we're through them all. Well, let's open it up. Do we have any other things that we should discuss beyond that? No? Okay.
I have.
Or no.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there we
yeah,
go.
I can hear you.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, I figured I had to reconfigure Hangouts again for specifying the audio device. I have a question. I don't know if this is the right place or time regarding security procedures in the future. And the last two updates kind of have been bringing it to my mind. As Backdrop and Drupal diverge over time, there will be more code that's in Backdrop that's unique from Drupal, and relying on Drupal to find security fixes will not really be a viable option. Is there a plan or an idea or something in the works or thought process about how that's going to be addressed in the future? Are there going to be people looking for things, or are we just going to wait for people to tell us about them, or what?
Well, okay, so there's a couple of things. We do have some automated tests in place, like some of the simple tests actually check, common XSS problems to make sure that our filtering continues to work and doesn't break with regressions in some places. So there is the automatic testing that happens there. And then as for reporting issues, we do have both mailing list and email address that people can subscribe and send reports to. So if you email security@backdropcms.org, that goes to security team members, although I think that we should probably expand that because I know we've been adding new members. We could expand that out to more people. And if it's something that is Backdrop specific, then we use the Backdrop ops/security GitHub issue tracker for security issues related to Backdrop only. And we've actually even had one, maybe two Backdrop specific fixes that haven't applied to Drupal, things that, issues that we discovered within Backdrop itself that didn't apply to either Drupal 7 or Drupal 8. And so those kinds of problems have already occurred, and we'll continue to do those kind of post Drupal, if you will. Like once the divergence is so great that we're not sharing and collaborating on security issues, then we'll just continue using that process for Backdrop alone. But for the time being, we have a lot of overlap with Drupal security issues. And when that happens, right now, only I'm being added to the security issues, mostly because it's tedious using Drupal's security website to add individuals. Like there's no ability to say like add a group of people. You have to add them all individually. And we've asked to get Jeff added a couple of times, but I think that it's not that they're unwilling. It's just that it's more overhead for them to continue adding large batches of people to the security issues for everyone that comes up in core. I don't know, does that answer it? I didn't really wrap that up, but we have a process for doing Backdrop specifically, and we have a process for working with the Drupal folks. And so once the overlap stops being there, we'll just switch entirely to the Backdrop only mechanism.
Okay.
I think there was also kind of a question there about like, how do we find the security issues in the first place? And Backdrop and Drupal is the same, which is that, we have automated tests, as Nate said, they'll check some things, but we're really relying on people who are using the software to find the exploits and report them using the security channels. It just so happens that right now there's a lot more people using the Drupal software, so they're getting a lot more of the first reports of security issues than Backdrop is. But I would imagine that over time, as people start using Backdrop more, and as people start using Drupal 7 less, that'll shift to being the majority of people would start reporting, or at least a lot more people would start reporting through Backdrop's channels than through Drupal's if that's where the issues are discovered. So it's the same, we just don't have the same volume yet, which is why you're seeing all of the issues coming in through Drupal.
Right. Okay, that sounds good.
And I'm not sure if it's any major security release, but we found a couple issues that we had that were also in Drupal that they ported into Drupal from Backdrop, right?
I think that's happened once, but I can't recall what situation that was. Yeah, but it does happen. Yeah, it does happen.
There's been a lot of other issues that have happened that way, where like we fix something and then post security. Takes a little longer for them to get fixed in Drupal land too, and then they come back when we do our, keeping cross ports. So there's a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, we've actually started, speaking of security, we've started adding security into our common Backdrop presentations. So the presentation repository, and the last time Jen and I, a couple of times we've given presentations, we now include like, hey, how does collaboration work with security? Just because that question is always asked.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. I think that kind of addressed everything. Knowing that there's, a process and a plan already in place and being used, even if it's very lightly at this point, is helpful.
Okay, well, I think that's it. We're pressing almost into the hour-long mark. I think we'll wrap up for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining the meeting, and thank you for all of the activity that's been happening in the issue queue. I know it's always very exciting as we head towards feature freeze, but it's been a good release cycle, although thus far, like the functionality that's in 1.10 is fairly modest, but with the number of things that we have in the pipe, if we wrap up most of these things, which I think we will, we'll be in really good shape for a really pretty fantastic release with lots of new functionality. So thank you, everybody, for your hard work, and we'll see you guys on the internet. So thank you.
Bye, everyone.